Thank you for taking the time to watch my video. I really appreciate it. If you enjoyed this video, please click thumbs up as that will help grow my channel. If you'd like to subscribe, I'd appreciate that as well. And if you have any questions, feel free to leave those and I will respond. Again, thank you. Now, if you followed my video last week, and hopefully you are subscribed so you're seeing my videos as they come up, I talked a little bit about design. This week I'm going to do a platter. I'm going to talk about design as well. Sometimes, yes, you can put a piece of wood on the lathe and just start spinning it and see what comes out of it. In this case, that's not probably your best option. So there's some issues with this wood. It's a beautiful piece of wood. It's maple and it's got some spalding in it. But there's some issues with it. Number one, it's thin. And number one, it's not uniformly thin. So if you look here, you can see this end. It tails off basically to nothing over here. It does have a flat spot, but it only comes up to here. So, but I've got relatively good thickness here. And I have one flat side. So, number one, it's not going to be a bowl because it's not thick enough. I know I said that last week and then I ended up making a bowl anyways. It was thicker than this piece. This will not be a bowl. It will be a platter. This side's already flat. So, to minimize my wood loss, this will be the top. So, I'm going to mount this in my lathe on my woodworm screw, drilling a hole into here to start. And I'll make it round. This will be the bottom. So the advantage of this being the bottom is this curve here can be the bottom of the platter. So that will work well into my design. And we're going to do a platter with something called an OG curve on it. And we'll talk a little bit more about that once I get going. So I'm going to go ahead and mark the center and then cut this out into a circle and then we'll get it on the lathe. Here I'm just using a straight edge to mark from corner to corner to find the center. Later on I will drill a hole at the center that's the same size as my worm screw. On the table for my bandsaw, I have a T-slot. In that T-slot, I've got a piece of dowel, which is the same size as the hole I drilled, and I can slide that in and out the T-slot and set basically the radius of any circle that I want to cut. Having the bowl cut round before I start turning makes it a lot easier to get the turning started. It removes any vibration. The more balanced it can be to start, the easier it is. Here it is mounted in the lathe. Because of the abnormal shape of it, I still had some vibration. You can see here as it spins that one side's fairly thick and one side's thin, so that did cause a little bit of vibration, but not too much. Here I'm doing the push cut on the outside of the bowl with my bowl gouge. Again, I've talked about this before, but this is the easiest way to remove a lot of material. If you look at the bottom, you can also see what's known as ghost turning. It's not a continuous bottom at this point. There's some material on one side and not on the other, and you can see that shadow as it goes around. As I start turning the bottom, I turn the flute of the bowl gouge over, so I'm actually using the edges of the bowl gouge more as a scraper, and I'm doing a push and a pull cut across the bottom. Here you can really see the final shape. I did do some turning off camera, but the final shape is what I referred to earlier as an OG curve. So coming up from the bottom, it's got a convex curve, and then halfway up it switches to a concave curve. So it's basically an elongated S. In this case, I had a very smooth surface right off the tool and very little tear out. But I still started sanding around 80 grit with paper and then worked my way up, power sanding all the way to 400 grit. I will mention that I know some turners, and I originally was this way. I didn't want to start with too low of a grit. It made me think that I hadn't done a good job. Shouldn't think that way. Always start with the lowest grit that you need. If you've got some tear out, start with 60 grit. There's nothing wrong with that. You shouldn't start with a high grit and sacrifice the end result. Start with as low as you need, get the wood smooth to start with, and then work your way up through progressive grits. Again, you're not removing much material, you're just getting a smooth surface to start with. So the big thing is to not let your pride prevent you from sanding the way you need to sand. Here you can see I haven't put any finish yet on the bottom of the platter, but it is starting to develop gloss and shine, and that's just from the very smooth surface and sanding up to 400 grit. Now that I'm balanced, I can pull away my center stock, remove the tenon that I had there originally, and at this point I will cut in a mortise. As I'm cutting this mortise or recess that's going to go inside my chuck, I have a small jig here that tells me the diameter and the depth that I need to turn that recess. Here I'm just putting a straight edge across the bottom of the platter. I want to make sure that I'm flat so that the bowl will not rock. Now that I've sanded up to 600 grit, off camera I applied some sanding sealer, let that dry, and then denibbed it with a fine sanding pad, and then started applying my abrasive finish. If you're interested in seeing how I made this abrasive finish, you can check one of my previous videos. With the abrasive paste, you put it on with a paper towel, rub it in, and then basically buff it off. You continually change to a clean section of paper towel and continue rubbing it until the paper towel is clean. Once I'm done with the abrasive paste, then I switch to the polishing paste. Again, I make this as well. If you're interested in this, you can check my previous video. You can see now, as it's spinning, that the bottom and the outside of this platter has really started to develop some gloss. The next thing I do is I apply OB Shine Juice. I've talked about this in previous videos as well. But this really brings out the final gloss in the platter. So the outside is all finished now. This turned out to be a beautiful piece of wood. I think this is the best finish as well that I've ever applied. Hopefully the camera can pick it up, but it's very glossy and it's smooth as glass. It's got some nice markings, so here's some spalding in it. Turned out very nice that way as well. So how I did this, and you saw this in the video, but I sanded up to 600 grit. Then I burnished it with shavings, applied sanding sealer, burnished that as well. Then applied abrasive paste, homemade abrasive paste. Again, you can see my video on that if you go back and look on my YouTube channel. And then applied the polishing wax. And then finally the OB Shine Juice, and burnish that in as well. Again, beautiful finish and beautiful gloss. Hopefully that comes through in the camera. So now I'm going to flip it around. So I have this turned around in the lathe now. This is going to be a two-part video. At this point, we're just going to do a bit of shaping on the rim. The second video, I'm actually going to add some alcohol dyes to the surface here and color the wood. It's going to be a starburst pattern, so it's going to be reds and oranges and yellows. And it's going to be around the rim about this wide. So I'm just going to hollow out the inside of this a bit and leaving a wide rim on it. I'm not going to do the hollowing in this video because I want to save that until after I've worked the rim. For now, all I'm going to do is shape the rim a little bit and mark where the center is going to be. And then again, in part 2 of the video, you'll get to see how I've colored the rim. So I've turned this around in my lathe, and I just off camera just took and beveled the top of this, so it's not going to be flat. Just to explain what's going on here. You can see this center ring here. This is going to be taken out later in part 2 of the video, as well as embellishment of this surface. It's going to be dyed, and it's going to be a sunburst pattern. I don't have my dyes yet, so I'm waiting for those to come in. For now, I'm just going to sand this rim And then that's going to be the end of part 1 of the video. And then later on we will do the finish on the rest of it. So as I'm working the rim here, I'm going to keep the center piece, which is going to be the bowl portion of this platter. I'm leaving that intact. One, because I want the stability. With a large rim like this, if I removed too much material at this point, the rim could move as it changes in moisture. The other thing is the die may bleed into that centerpiece, so I want to leave that material there so that when I go to turn it out, that'll remove any dye that's bleeded in. So I don't know if you can see that on the camera, and I don't know if I've ever talked about this before, but on this first time sanding, all you're looking at doing is removing any tool marks. So it should be very smooth surface, and again, no tool marks whatsoever. So I see a little bit of a line right there and there. So I'm going to sand that a little bit more till they're gone. And then once I've removed any tool marks, then I'll start progressing up through the different grits. Now I'll switch to power sanding, and I believe this paper was at 60 grit, and then I'll switch this to 80 grit. That's a little coarser maybe than what I normally start with, but now I'll just move up through these up to at least 400. Keeping in mind, sanding is not for changing the shape. At this point, that profile is already set. All I'm trying to do is work my way up through the grits, getting the surface progressively smoother. Each grit, its job is just to remove any marks left behind from the previous grit. At this point, I'm not taking anywhere near enough material off to reshape it. The shape needs to be set with the tool. Final sanding on the rim. Again, power sanding, starting at 80 grit, working my way up to 400. There, so that's done. This is going to be the end of part 1 of this video. That surface is nice and smooth. I do not see any scratches. And because I'm painting it in the next step, it's imperative that there are no scratches. Any scratches would just be further exemplified. I don't want to go too fine either, because I don't want to completely seal the wood, because the die does have to penetrate in a little bit. So we're going to stop here. I hope you follow along with my videos, and we'll come back for part 2 of the video. Thank you.